Good morning, everyone. I hope you all are there. So now we can start with our discussion. As I told you yesterday that we are focusing on some theories of organization and administration. And with regard to the concerned theory, if you remember, we have discussed about the very first initial but fundamental coherent theory of administration and organization called as scientific management theory proposed by Mr. Frederick Taylor. So I hope so all the concepts and the consideration with regard to the Taylorism or scientific management theory is very much clear in your mind. And now I am coming to one more important theory of administration, or we can say organization, which is further very much important to understand the administrative behavior, the administrative structure, and the administrative activities. The name of the theory is called as classical theory. Now, as I told you before, the evolution of scientific management theory had taken place between, or we can say in the very first era of the evolution of public administration as a discipline. I mean, the evolution had taken place between 1887 to 1926, although most of the observations or most of the outcomes which had been given by a scientific management theory had been given in the earlier part of 20th century. Agree? So here we have, of course, a theory called as the scientific management theory. But when I talk about the next important theory called as classical theory, the evolution of classical theory, focus, classical theory, its evolution had taken place, you can say, in the era of principles. I told you in the previous classes also, if you remember, that from 1927 to 1937, the evolution of some universal principles had taken place. And the concerned theory called as classical theory had been evolved, actually has been evolved in the same era of the evolution of principles. So what this classical theory is all about, basically what are the connotations, what are the specific subject matter of classical theory, what are the outcomes of classical theory, इन सब पर हमें बात करना है. तो हमारी हम लोग डिस्कशन स्टार्ट करते हैं बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट थ्योरी से, ठीक है, विच इज अगेन seems to be a much more complete theory of administration and organization called as classical theory. Now be very sure, in the era of evolution of principles, the second stage, the development of two specific theories had taken place. The very first theory was classical theory, what I'm going to discuss today. And the second important theory is, of course, which one? The bureaucratic theory, the theory of bureaucracy. So we have to take the regard of both the theories, I mean the classical theory and the bureaucratic theory. I hope you got my point. Now, second important thing is that I always told you that any successor theory is nothing but the reformatory version of its predecessor theory. कोई भी जो नई थ्योरी आती है, जो पुरानी थ्योरी होती है, उसका एक सुधरा हुआ रूप होती है, रिफॉर्मेटरी वर्जन होती है. मेरे कहने का मतलब है कि जितने भी लिमिटेशंस होते हैं, लूप होल्स होते हैं, या कमियां खामियां होती हैं प्रीवियस थ्योरीज में, all these new theories are overcoming or of course reforming the concerned limitations of the previous theories. And here we have, of course, a very interesting theory called as what? The classical theory. Classical theory could be regarded, be very sure, as a reformatory version of scientific management theory. Okay? So just see what this classical theory is all about, and of course, we are going to consider that in which particular manner we can discover the possible outcomes of classical theory. Agree? So let's come to classical theory now. Done? चलिए एक टाइटल लिखिएगा, क्लासिकल थ्योरी. क्लासिकल थ्योरी, इस पर बात करते हैं. क्लासिकल थ्योरी. So, as we know very well, as I told you before, the evolution of classical theory had taken place from 1927 to 1937. Okay? But this theory has been proposed by some scholars. I want to specify their names also. You have to remember these names. The very first and the foremost scholar in this area was Mr. Fayol, Henry Fayol. तो ध्यान रखिएगा, ये सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट स्कॉलर रहे हैं क्लासिकल थ्योरी के. इनका नाम था हेनरी फ्योल. The second important scholar, actually there are a number of scholars, are Gulick and Urwick. Gulick and Urwick. With that, we are having some more scholars like Mooney and Relay. Mooney and Riley. With Mooney and Riley, there is one more very prominent scholar named Mary Parker Follett or Follett. Mary Parker Follett. So all these important scholars basically have propounded a theory, a very interesting and very cognizable theory called as classical theory. Now, what this classical theory is all about? So initially what we are going to do, we are going to discuss the basic fundamental introduction of classical theory. Then I'm going to focus, of course, on the basic theme, the objective of classical theory. And finally, we are going to critically evaluate the classical theory. जब हम क्रिटिकल इवैल्यूएशन करते हैं तो मैं आपको हमेशा ये बताता हूं, मैं इसका बड़ा फैन इसलिए भी हूं क्योंकि जब भी हम किसी भी टॉपिक का क्रिटिकल इवैल्यूएशन करते हैं तो हम 2 या 3 डायमेंशंस कवर कर लेते हैं। पहला डायमेंशन ये होता है कि उसके लिमिटेशंस को, क्रिटिसिज्म को हम लोग हाईलाइट करते हैं। उसके बाद हम लोग ये भी इवैल्यूएट करते हैं कि क्रिटिसिज्म सही था या गलत था, या कितना सही था या कितना गलत था। आई मीन वी आर एनालाइजिंग और इवैल्यूएटिंग द क्रिटिसिज्म, द क्रिटिकल पार्ट। So here we are of course providing a type of, you can say, positive aspect or positive outlook to the concerned concept. Agree? तो एक positive aspect या positive nature भी हमें पता चल जाता है। और फिर उसके बाद of course what we are doing, we can highlight those issues where the reform could be done. Why? Because if we know the limitations, loopholes, gray areas and shortcomings of a particular concept, then anytime we can provide some suggestion. हम सजेशंस के लिए, सुधार के खाके के लिए एक रिफॉर्मेटरी एजेंडा तैयार कर सकते हैं अगर हम क्रिटिकल इवैल्यूएशन करते हैं। तो आई एम ए वेरी बिग फैन ऑफ क्रिटिकल इवैल्यूएशन। मेरा ये मानना है कि हर एक बच्चे को कभी भी अपनी आंसर राइटिंग की प्रैक्टिस करनी चाहिए तो वो इसी फॉर्मेट में करनी चाहिए कि उसे कुछ टॉपिक्स का क्रिटिकल इवैल्यूएशन करना चाहिए। मैं आपको फिर बता दूं, हम लोग क्रिटिसिज्म का इवैल्यूएशन कर रहे हैं, and then we are substantiating that whether that particular criticism is optimum, rational or logical or not. If it is not logical, then we can highlight of course some other aspect. If it is logical, then of course we can pursue with the criticism. And once we are knowing the limitations, the loopholes of a particular concept of theory or a particular, you can say basically functioning of an organization, then easily we can provide some suggestion to the examiner. तो इसलिए क्रिटिकल इवैल्यूएशन से 3 डायमेंशंस कवर हो जाते हैं। डन। और आपको एक कोहेसिवनेस भी पता चल जाती है किसी कंसेप्ट की। Nevertheless, let's start the classical theory. So as I told you before, there are so many scholars which have propounded the classical theory. Let me tell you one more time. Scholars like Fayol, Gulick, Urwig, Mooney, Riley and Mary Parker Follett. Now, the name of all these scholars are required to be of course written in the examination. आपको ये लिखना पड़ेगा। मैं लिखवाता हूँ अभी आपको। तो देख लेते हैं ये क्लासिकल थ्योरी थी क्या। जस्ट सी, एंड देन विल डिस्कस हाउ द क्लासिकल थ्योरी इज समवॉट डिफरेंट फ्रॉम द अदर थ्योरी। अदर थ्योरी आई मीन ऑफ कोर्स यू कैन से द साइंटिफिक मैनेजमेंट थ्योरी। सो वी कैन ड्रॉ ए कंपैरिजन बिटवीन द क्लासिकल थ्योरी एंड द साइंटिफिक मैनेजमेंट थ्योरी। लेट्स मूव विद द क्लासिकल थ्योरी नाउ। नाउ क्लासिकल थ्योरी बिकम्स अ वेरी फर्स्ट थ्योरी विच फोकस ऑन द फॉर्मल ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल स्ट्रक्चर। ठीक है। Now when I take the regard of formal organizational structure, I always told you that when we are creating an organization or institution, we always create it in the form of a hierarchy. जब किसी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को हम लोग बनाते हैं तो हायरार्कियल ऑर्डर में बनाते हैं। उसमें एक सुपीरियर पोस्ट बनाते हैं, सुपीरियर पोस्ट के नीचे सबऑर्डिनेट पोस्ट बनाते हैं, सबऑर्डिनेट के भी सबऑर्डिनेट होते हैं, सबऑर्डिनेट के भी इंफीरियर होते हैं। So we are finding a proper gradation in any particular office, a department, institution, organization, setup or ministry. मैं ये एग्जांपल हमेशा देता हूं आपको कि when I take the regard of or when we take the regard of district administration. So listen, in the district administration we are finding a proper hierarchy. At the top level we are finding district collector. उसके नीचे है SDM. Then we are finding तहसीलदार. Below to तहसीलदार नायब तहसीलदार. Below to नायब तहसीलदार सर्कल ऑफिसर, बिलो टू सर्कल ऑफिसर पटवारी, बिलो टू पटवारी विलेज लेवल वर्कर्स। तो एक पूरी हायरार्की है एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन की एट द डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल। सो एवरी डिपार्टमेंट, एवरी मिनिस्ट्री, एवरी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन और इंस्टीट्यूशन is crafted, created and configured based on the same hierarchical model. Now this particular theory is focusing, listen carefully, is focusing on the whole administrative structure from the top to the bottom, and it is also focusing on the activities, I mean the process of any particular administrative structure. सिंपल भाषा में अगर मैं आपसे बोलूं तो इसका मतलब यह था कि एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का फॉर्मल स्ट्रक्चर क्या होना चाहिए। मतलब सुपीरियर पर पोस्ट पर अगर कोई आदमी बैठा है तो उसकी पावर अथॉरिटी क्या होनी चाहिए, उसकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी क्या होनी चाहिए, उसके नीचे जो ऑफिसर है, सबऑर्डिनेट है, उसकी पावर अथॉरिटी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी फंक्शंस क्या होने चाहिए। सो हियर व्हाट वी आर डूइंग, वी आर फोकसिंग ऑन द होल एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव स्ट्रक्चर एंड the officers or the employees which are sitting at different levels of organization structure, they are performing some activities, वो कुछ काम कर रहे हैं। जैसे एक अकाउंटेंट है तो पहले तो हमने ये बता दिया कि अकाउंटेंट का काम क्या होगा। अकाउंटेंट का काम होगा अकाउंटिंग करना, बैलेंस शीट बनाना, ठीक है। तो हमने पहले ये बता दिया कि भाई एक ऑफिसर होगा अकाउंटेंट, उसके ये पावर अथॉरिटी होंगी, उसे अकाउंटिंग करना होगा। लेकिन अब वो अकाउंटिंग का काम शुरू करेगा, मतलब ये उसकी एक्टिविटी हो गई। तो जब वो अकाउंटिंग का काम शुरू करेगा, वेदर दैट पर्टिकुलर पर्सन इज एफिशिएंट इनफ और नॉट टू परफॉर्म द फिनोमेना और द प्रोसेस ऑफ अकाउंटिंग। So when an accountant is performing the activity of accounting, it is called as process or activity of the concerned person. जैसे मैंने एग्जांपल दिया कि हमने ऑफिस में एक पोस्ट बनाई क्लर्क की, हेड क्लर्क की, उसके नीचे की क्लर्क की, सबऑर्डिनेट क्लर्क की, पर एक पोस्ट बना दी क्लर्क की। तो क्लर्क के पास कुछ पावर है, अथॉरिटी, रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी, क्लर्क को पता है उसका काम क्या करना है। लेकिन जब वो अपना काम करना शुरू करेगा, जिसे हम लोग बोलते हैं क्लरिकल एक्टिविटीज, so here we have to focus on that whether the clerical activities performed by an office called as clerk or officer called as clerk is efficient enough, productive enough, effective enough or not. So classical theories become of course a very first theory which focus on the formal organizational structure. मतलब एक organization का structure हमें कैसे बनाना है, and with organizational structure it also focus on activities. The concept over here is, if we are having, suniye, the formal organizational structure, the proper organizational structure, and of course efficient, scientifically proven activities, then we can bring more production, more efficiency, more effectiveness in the organization or administration. ठीक है, अगर आपको याद हो, the scientific management theory is of course mainly focusing on management of workers. I mean, how we have to manage workers at the grassroots level, and how we have to develop the scientific method by which the workers should be managed. So scientific management theory is mainly focusing on shop floor. Shop floor. अच्छा, शॉप फ्लोर का मतलब होता है कि जो नीचे के वर्कर्स होते हैं, एम्प्लॉइज होते हैं, जिसे हम लोग सबऑर्डिनेट कहते हैं, उन पर फोकस करना और उनका मैनेजमेंट करना। जैसे मैंने कल आपको बताया था कि साइंटिफिक मैनेजमेंट थ्योरी, theory's main outcome was that we have to scientifically select a worker and then we have to bring the best way to do any work with worker. I mean, the scientifically selected worker have to perform, be very sure, have to perform the best way to do any particular type of work. But scientific management theory is mainly focusing on workers, I mean the management of workers, the scientific management of workers. Although classical theory is not only focusing on workers, I mean at the lower level, but also superior at the higher level also. I mean, classical theory wants to bring some improvement, some efficiency, some effectiveness in the whole organizational structure from the top to the bottom. But its main focus is on upper level. Upper level means superior level, authoritative level, higher graded level. Agree? So there's a basic difference between classical theory and the scientific management theory. But listen carefully, when I take the regard of the two theories, initially we are focusing on classical theory. The main objective of classical theory is that, be very sure, if any organization, sunna, or any institution is applying or enforcing some fundamental principles, if any organization or institution is of course applying or operationalizing any several fundamental principles, then that particular organization could bring more effectiveness and efficiency. मतलब ये है कि कुछ ऐसे प्रिंसिपल्स होते हैं, सिंपल भाषा में समझो, जिन्हें अगर कोई ऑर्गेनाइजेशन पब्लिक हो या प्राइवेट हो, इंडस्ट्री हो, कंपनी हो या पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन हो, अगर इन प्रिंसिपल्स को वो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन अडॉप्ट कर ले, अंडरस्टैंड, या सेटअप अडॉप्ट कर ले, तो उस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में ज्यादा एफिशिएंसी, इफेक्टिवनेस और प्रोडक्शन आ सकता है। then that particular setup would become, of course, much more efficient and much more cognizable to perform any particular work if that particular setup or organization is complying, enforcing, and adopting some fundamental principles. So the main focus of this particular theory was to develop some principles. And once these principles are established or developed, we have to apply these principles in every organizational setup. These principles are scientifically tested and verified. And these principles could be applied, of course, in any setup, in any organizational setup. और जो सेटअप या जो इंस्टीट्यूशन, जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन इन प्रिंसिपल्स को अडॉप्ट कर लेता है, वो एफिशिएंट हो जाता है, वो इफेक्टिव हो जाता है, वो प्रोडक्टिव हो जाता है। लेकिन ऐसे कौन कौन से प्रिंसिपल्स हैं? मैंने कल कुछ बताए भी थे, आज मैं और बता देता हूं। Like I want to specify that Mr. Henry Fayol has identified total 14 principles. Agree? There was a scholar called as Moon and Rayleigh. They also identify some principles. Okay? So number of scholars have identified number of principles. I want to demarcate some principles over here. The very first principle is called as division of work. Division of work, the foremost and the most important principle. Division of work. इसका मतलब यह है कि when we are creating an organization based on hierarchy, सुनो, then we have to divide the work. Divide the work between superior, subordinate, subordinate to the subordinate, subordinate to the subordinate. मतलब अलग अलग लेवल पर जितने भी एम्प्लॉइज हैं उनमें वर्क का डिवीजन कर दो। जब वर्क का हम लोग डिवीजन करेंगे तो हो सकता है कि एक पोस्ट हो मैनेजर की, मैनेजर के नीचे पोस्ट हो सब मैनेजर की, एक पोस्ट हो क्लर्क की, एक पोस्ट हो टेक्नीशियन की, एक पोस्ट हो यू कैन से बेसिकली प्रोफेशनल सेटअप की, मतलब अकाउंटेंट की, ऑडिटर की। सो व्हेन वी आर डिवाइडिंग द वर्क, बी वेरी श्योर वी कैन ब्रिंग सम स्पेशलाइजेशन इन द वर्किंग ऑफ ए पर्टिकुलर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. So the main purpose of division of work would be specialization. अकाउंटेंट को अकाउंटिंग का काम करना है, ऑडिटर को ऑडिटर का काम करना है, क्लर्क को क्लरिकल काम करना है, मैनेजर को मैनेजमेंट करना है। एग्री? तो कोई भी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन हम लोग बनाते हैं तो इस प्रिंसिपल को हमें अडॉप्ट करना बहुत जरूरी होगा, किसको क्या काम करना है, और तभी जाके हम लोग स्पेशलाइजेशन ला सकते हैं। आई होप यू गॉट माय पॉइंट. So the very first important principle of administration would be division of work. And then they are having number of principles. In the previous class I also told you. The second important principle is called as a unity of command. Unity of command. Now unity of command means, of course, a particular employee or a particular person should take direction and command only from one supervisor. जैसे अगर मैं किसी कंपनी में काम कर रहा हूं या पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में, सरकार के लिए एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में काम कर रहा हूं, तो इनका कहना यह था, देखो मैं आपको फिर बता दूं, ये थ्योरी बहुत पहले आई थी. द इवोल्यूशन ऑफ दिस पर्टिकुलर थ्योरी हैज टेकन प्लेस बिटवीन 1927 एंड 1937 एंड सो मेनी स्कॉलर्स हैव कंट्रीब्यूटेड इन द इवोल्यूशन ऑफ दिस थ्योरी. तो ये बहुत पहले की बात है. अब तो खैर पूरी टेक्नोलॉजी चेंज हो गई है. अब एक आदमी घर पे बैठे बैठे ईमेल के थ्रू या टेलीकॉन्फ्रेंसिंग के थ्रू, ठीक है, या इमोशनल इंटेलिजेंस के थ्रू ही आप कह सकते हो, कई लोगों को कंट्रोल कर सकता है या कमांड कर सकता है. तो अब वो चीज़ अलग हो चुकी है. लेकिन ये बात हो रही है अर्ली पार्ट ऑफ 20th सेंचुरी की, फ्रॉम 1927 टू 1937. एंड एट दैट टाइम वन प्रिंसिपल वॉज प्रोपाउंडेड कॉल्ड एज यूनिटी ऑफ कमांड. नाउ यूनिटी ऑफ कमांड मीन्स व्हाट? It means that a person should take command and direction only from one superior. अगर मैं बहुत सारे सुपीरियर से कमांड लूंगा, सुनना, तो हो सकता है कि मेरे काम में ओवरलैपिंग हो जाए, मैं कंफ्यूज हो जाऊं. So it should be very clear in the mind of an employee that of course he or she has to take the command from which particular officer or supervisor. Because if a person who is taking these type of command, direction and of course guidance from number of supervisors, from number of superiors, then the process of formalism could rise. Formalism का मतलब होता है overlapping. आपको ये क्लियर ही नहीं हो पाएगा कि आपको काम क्या करना है, क्योंकि कोई कुछ बोल रहा है, कोई कुछ बोल रहा है. So there should be a unity of command. Again, it's a very important principle of administration, according to Henry Fayol. Then we are having number of principles. In the previous class, I told you, if you remember, span of control. Span of control, I told you in the previous class also. Span of control literally means a supervisor can control how many number of employees. ठीक है, मतलब एक सुपरवाइजर की कैपेसिटी कितनी होनी चाहिए कि वो कितने एम्प्लॉयज को कंट्रोल कर सके, सुपरवाइज कर सके और डायरेक्ट कर सके, उसे बोलते हैं स्पैन. स्पैन का मतलब होता है एरिया. लाइक इफ आई एम एन ऑडिटर and under me number of auditors are working, or if I am a chief accountant and under me of course so many lower accountant, I mean sub accountants are working. Like if I am a registrar and under me of course number of sub registrars are working. So span of control means of course the capacity of a supervisor like me, I am a registrar, to control and supervise, command and of course coordinate number of subordinates. मैं कितने लोगों को कंट्रोल कर सकता हूं या सुपरवाइज कर सकता हूं या डायरेक्ट कर सकता हूं, उसे बोलते हैं स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल. समझ रहे हैं? तो इनका यह मानना था कि स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल जितना कम होगा उतनी एफिशिएंसी ज्यादा होगी. जैसे कुछ लोग बोलते हैं कि भाई एक सुपरवाइजर जो होता है वो केवल 4 लोगों को कंट्रोल कर सकता है या सुपरवाइज कर सकता है. कोई लोग बोलते हैं 5 को कर सकता है, कोई बोलते हैं 10 को कर सकता है. तो स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल could differ in different type of organization. It also depends on different type of work also. If the work is multidimensional, multifaceted, अगर वर्क थोड़ा सा कॉम्प्लिकेटेड है तो स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल कम होना चाहिए. और अगर वर्क रूटीन टाइप है, जैसे अकाउंटिंग करनी है, सबको पता है अकाउंटिंग कैसे करनी है, बही खाता बनाना है, ठीक है, तो अगर वर्क रूटीन टाइप है तो एक सुपरवाइजर ज्यादा लोगों को कंट्रोल कर सकता है. So it depends on the nature of work also. I mean the span of control depends on the nature of work also. So in this way, I will discuss all the principles in the coming time. In this way, these principles are demarcated and codified by the propounders of classical theory. और इनका ये मानना था कि in every organization we have to adopt all these principles. If we are adopting all these principles, then we can bring more efficiency, more effectiveness, more productivity, more competence in the concerned organization or administration. So the main locus and focus, सबसे बड़ा ऑब्जेक्टिव इस थ्योरी का ये था कि कुछ ऐसे प्रिंसिपल्स का डेवलपमेंट, इवोल्यूशन कर दिया जाए, और जब भी कभी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बनाया जाए, ठीक है, तो उन्हें ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को इन्हीं प्रिंसिपल्स के अकॉर्डिंगली बनाया जाए. मतलब डिवीजन ऑफ लेबर भी हो, यूनिटी ऑफ कमांड भी हो, स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल क्लियर हो, सेंट्रलाइजेशन भी हो, डेलीगेशन भी हो, ऑर्डर भी ठीक से हो, डिसिप्लिन भी हो, कई प्रिंसिपल्स हैं. And then only we can bring efficiency and economy. So the main focus area of classical theory is to apply some principles in different organization setting. Now listen carefully. According to classical theory, be very sure, these principles are having universal application. I mean, we can apply these principles in any type of organization. It could be public, it could be private, it could be an organization of Latin America, North America, India, China, Japan, Russia. पूरी दुनिया में जितनी भी इंडस्ट्रीज हैं या सेटअप हैं या एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन हैं, उनमें सब में इन प्रिंसिपल्स को हम लोग अप्लाई कर सकते हैं. और अगर हम अप्लाई करते हैं तो उस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को हम लोग ज़्यादा एफिशिएंट बना सकते हैं, ज़्यादा प्रोडक्टिव बना सकते हैं. So these principles are having a type of universal application. I mean, the principle of positivism and universalization remain the basic feature of classical theory. And this is actually, you can say, the main theme of classical theory. I hope you understand the introduction part, the main focus area of classical theory, what they want to achieve. They specify that administration is a science which is based on some principles. If you remember, scientific management theory has clarified that management is a science which is based on some methods. According to them, administration is a science which is based on some principles. And these principles can be applied universally in different type of organization to bring more productivity and efficiency. Clear? So I hope so. Now you are in a position to understand the basic theme of classical theory. ठीक, इसका मैं एक इंट्रोडक्शन आप लोगों को लिखाता हूं ताकि आपके दिमाग में चीजें क्लियर हों. यू आर हैविंग द सपोर्टिंग नोट्स आल्सो, बट माय नोट्स, आई मीन द डिक्टेशन पार्ट वुड बी समवॉट डिफरेंट फ्रॉम द सपोर्टिंग नोट्स. ठीक है, तो दोनों को पढ़ लीजिए, दोनों को एमएलगेट कीजिए और फिर आपका आंसर पूरा तैयार हो जाएगा। क्वेश्चन कैसे भी आए आप आंसर लिखने की स्थिति में होंगे। ठीक है, तो जस्ट राइट, you can say basically a brief note about the introduction part and then we'll focus on the other aspect of classical theory. चलिए classical theory, classical theory, continue. Classical theory was the most prominent and fundamental approach. Classical theory was the most prominent and fundamental approach. Was the most prominent and fundamental approach. Most prominent and fundamental approach. Fundamental approach which is concerned with the formal organizational structure, concerned with the formal organizational structure, formal organizational structure as well as formal organizational structure as well as process of administrative management, as well as process of administrative management, process of administrative management. It is also regarded as traditional theory, formal organizational theory, traditional theory, formal organizational theory, formal organizational theory, formal organizational theory, and mechanist theory of organization, and mechanist theory of organization, mechanist theory of organization, mechanist theory of organization, propounded by scholars like Henry Fayol, Luther Gulick, Urwick, G-U-L-L-I-C-K, Urwick, U-R-W-I-C-K, Mooney, M-O-O-N-E-Y, M-O-O-N-E-Y, Relay, R-E-I-L-E-Y, R-E-I-L-E-Y, etc. I hope the introduction of the theory is clear. Relay, etc. Change the paragraph. According to this theory, efficiency and economy can be maintained or maximized. Efficiency and economy can be maximized in an organization, when it is established, in accordance with certain fundamental principles, Agree? fundamental principles. It means if an organization established based on, if an organization established based on these principles, based on these principles, then the concerned organization or setting, would attain maximum efficiency and effectiveness. Maximum efficiency and effectiveness. Effectiveness. Continue. According to this theory, efficiency and effectiveness. Continue. According to this theory, the principles are having universal validity. Principles are having universal validity, and they can be applied, applied in any organizational setting. They can be applied in any organizational setting, irrespective of its nature and location. समझ रहे हो, कहीं पर भी हम उसे अप्लाई कर सकते हैं, irrespective of its nature and location. Continue. Principles like division of work, what I told you, division of work, hierarchy, rationality, unity of command, order, discipline, etc. Have universal applicability, to bring more efficiency and production in an organization. More efficiency and productivity in an organization. Subsequently, last sentence. Subsequently, assertion of positivism and universalization. Assertion of positivism and universalization remains the basic focus area of classical theory. तो मुझे उम्मीद है आप समझे कि what this classical theory is all about. Let me conclude the topic in this particular manner, that classical theory want to develop some fundamental principles, and these principles could be applied, of course, in any organization. If we are applying these principles, we can bring more production, effectiveness, and economy in the concerned organization. And this theory is focusing on the formal organizational structure and the processes which are duly efficient by adopting these principles. Now, as I told you before, number of scholars have given number of principles. Like Henry Fayol has given 14 principles. Gulick and Urvik has given 10 principles. Moone and Rayleigh has given 4 principles. ठीक है, प्रिंसिपल जो मैं आपको बता रहा हूं बार बार, there's a separate topic in your syllabus called as principles of organization. और इन प्रिंसिपल के बेस पर हमें कोई भी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन या एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को बनाना है, तब जाके हम लोग ज्यादा प्रोडक्शन या प्रोडक्टिविटी ला सकते हैं। ये कंसेप्ट था। एक और चीज इंपॉर्टेंट, and then I am going to compare the scientific management theory and the classical theory. क्वेश्चन ये भी आ सकता है इन 5 मार्कर टू कंपेयर द क्लासिकल थ्योरी विद साइंटिफिक मैनेजमेंट थ्योरी। ठीक है, तो जरा देख लेते हो एक चीज और। नाउ दिस पर्टिकुलर थ्योरी कॉल्ड एज क्लासिकल थ्योरी इज मेनली फोकसिंग ऑन इकोनॉमिक मैन। इकोनॉमिक मैन, अच्छा, इकोनॉमिक मैन का मतलब यह होता है कि सी इफ आई एम वर्किंग इन अ कंपनी और इन एन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, then I can get motivated only by economic materialistic factors. अगर मैं किसी कंपनी में, ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में, एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में, सरकार के लिए काम भी कर रहा हूं या फिर प्राइवेट सेक्टर में भी काम कर रहा हूं, तो मेरे लिए सबसे बड़ा मोटिवेटिंग फैक्टर है पैसा। The most important prominent motivating factor for me is of course nothing but remuneration, pay, allowances, provident fund. Because I am an economic man, I can get motivated only by materialistic factor. ठीक है, आप लोगों को ज्यादा पैसा दो, वो आपकी तरफ आ जाएंगे। होता भी ऐसा है, ऐसा नहीं है, लेकिन केवल ऐसा ही होता हो ये ठीक नहीं है, इस पर हम आगे बात करेंगे। लेकिन इन थ्योरीज का ये मानना था कि इफ वी आर प्रोवाइडिंग मोर रेन्यूमरेशन, मोर पे, मोर सिक्योरिटी, मोर प्रोविडेंट फंड, मोर पेंशन, मोर टीए, मोर डीए एक्सेट्रा टू ए पर्सन हु इज वर्किंग इन ए कंपनी, then that particular person would be motivated only by the concerned physical factors called as economical factors or peculiar factors. ठीक है, आप ज्यादा पैसा दीजिए उसको, उससे ज्यादा काम करवा दीजिए। तो 3-4 इंपॉर्टेंट पार्ट थे इस थ्योरी के जो मैं आपको बताना चाहता हूं। पहला एस्पेक्ट ये था, फर्स्ट, द थ्योरी is working on formal organizational structure and that structure should be created by adopting some principles. If we are adopting these principles in the structure, then the activities of the administration would become much more efficient. समझ रहे हो, हमें जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बनाना है वो इन प्रिंसिपल्स के बेस पर बनाना है। बिना इन प्रिंसिपल्स के बेस पर अगर हम ऑर्गेनाइजेशन या कोई सेटअप बनाते हैं, ठीक है, एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को भी बनाते हैं, तो एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन एफिशिएंट नहीं हो सकता, इनका यह मानना था। अगर प्रिंसिपल्स के बेस पर हम इस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन सेटअप को बनाते हैं, तो जो एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन की एक्टिविटीज होते हैं, उनके कार्य होते हैं, उनकी प्रोसेस होती हैं, वो अपने आप एफिशिएंट हो जाती हैं। क्यों? क्योंकि दीज प्रिंसिपल्स आर हैविंग यूनिवर्सल वैलिडिटी और यूनिवर्सल एप्लीकेशन। एग्री? फर्स्ट थिंग। एंड सेकंड थिंग, the person who are working in the organization which is created based on these principles are economic person, economic man, and they are mainly motivated by economical factors. Economical factors like physical factors, पैसा, धन, दौलत, security, car, bangla, etc. They are always motivated by physical factors or economical factors. Why? Because a person who is working in an organization is an economical man. So this was the perception of classical theorists. A number of principles had been given. As I told you before, Henry Fayol has given 14 principles. मैं principles आगे पढ़ाऊंगा क्योंकि अलग से टॉपिक है principles का। मैंने कुछ principles यहाँ पर आपको बताया, पिछली क्लास में भी बताया। Agree? Gulick and Urvik has given 10 principles. Moone and Rayleigh have given 4 principles. The principles given by all these scholars are almost same. They are overlapping with each other. मतलब जो प्रिंसिपल फेयोल ने बताया वही गुलिक, उर्विक ने और मून रेले ने बता दी। ठीक है, so my concept over here is basically the theories was based on principle, and that's why the evolution of this particular theory has taken place in the era of principles from 1927 to 1937. In 1937, ठीक है, a paper was published by Luther Gulick, paper on the science of administration. Listen here. one paper was published called as for the paper on the science of administration. And by this paper, the whole theory come to its zenith. Zenith means optimum height, flourishment of the theory. ये थ्योरी सबसे ज्यादा पॉपुलर हुई 1937 तक आते आते, जब एक स्कॉलर थे लूथर गुलिक, उन्होंने एक पेपर पब्लिश किया, पेपर ऑन द साइंस ऑफ एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. And by this particular paper, of course, the theory get flourishment and more recognition. I hope you understand the concept or the subject matter of classical theory. Now just see how this classical theory is somewhat different from scientific management theory. Suniye. So when I compare the scientific management theory with that of classical theory, so just see the basic difference between the two. Let me tell you one more time, the question with regard to these theories would be asked or could be asked in 5 marker also. तो 5 मार्कर में वो पूछ सकते हैं ड्रॉ ए कंपैरिजन बिटवीन और डिफरेंशिएट बिटवीन साइंटिफिक मैनेजमेंट थ्योरी एंड क्लासिकल थ्योरी. ठीक है, तो आपको एक कंपैरिजन ड्रॉ करना पड़ेगा, 4-5 पॉइंट लिखने पड़ेंगे. 50 वर्ड्स का क्वेश्चन है ये. देखो क्या है, समझिए. सी, just see the focus area of scientific management theory. The very focus area of scientific management theory was that we have to develop some scientific methods which could be applied in any type of organization or any type of setting or any type of administration. Agree? But here the main focus area of classical theory was, be very sure, that we have to develop some principles, and these principles could be applied, be very sure, in any type of organization. So the scientific management theory has not focused on the development of a particular category of principle. Their main rely point on is on actually for the development of certain specific methods, techniques and procedures. These methods could be applicable in different type of organizational setting. तो यहां पर दोनों थ्योरीज थोड़ी सी अलग हो जाती हैं, लेकिन दोनों का यह मानना था कि द मेथड्स डेवलप्ड बाय साइंटिफिक टेस्टिंग वेरिफिकेशन एंड द प्रिंसिपल्स डेवलप्ड बाय लॉट ऑफ रिसर्च would be applicable, of course, in any organization or any administration. So the methods and the principles are having universal validity. ठीक है, तो आप समझे the point of difference between the two theory. Second thing is very sure, the scientific management theory is mainly focusing on shop level. Now shop level means, of course, in the hierarchy we are finding superior officers and subordinate persons. So scientific management theory is mainly focusing on the management of workers, I mean management of those employees which are working at the lower level of an organization. The main focus area of scientific management theory is to manage workers, manage the methods, working style of employees which are working at the lower level. And that lower level is called a shop level, I mean lower level. Although when I take the regard of classical theory, focus, the propounders of the classical theory, be very sure, are mainly focusing on upper level, I mean superior level. Okay? Are mainly focusing on superior level. Clear? Although the propounders of classical theory has taken administration as a whole, organization as a whole, from the upper to the lower level, but their main focus area would be to bring more efficiency and effectiveness in the employees which are working at the higher level, I mean managerial level. While scientific management theory is mainly focusing to bring effectiveness in the workers which are working at the lower levels. And that's a basic difference between the two theories, the scientific management and the classical theory. Okay? Just see one more point of difference. Okay? The third important point of difference was, be very sure, that scientific management theory is mainly focusing on the method or process by which we can bring more efficiency and effectiveness in a particular organization. I mean the best work or the best way to do any particular work. हमें उस बेस्ट तरीके को, मेथड को, टेक्निक को खोजना पड़ेगा, साइंटिफिक टेक्निक को खोजना पड़ेगा, जिससे वर्कर सबसे ज्यादा प्रोडक्शन दे सकते हैं, जिससे सबसे ज्यादा इफेक्टिवनेस आ सकती है। So scientific management theory is mainly focusing on the method or the process by which we can bring more effectiveness in the organization. Lekin when I compare the scientific management theory with that of classical theory, the classical theory is not only focusing on method, but also focusing on formal structure. Formal structure. Now, talking about formal structure in the sense, be very sure, understand my concept. Formal structure means that when we are creating the organization should be created based on some principles. तो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को हमें कैसे बनाना है, कैसे स्टैब्लिश करना है, उसे कुछ प्रिंसिपल्स के बेस पर बनाना पड़ेगा। यूनिटी ऑफ कमांड, स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल, हायरार्की, डिवीजन ऑफ वर्क, डेलीगेशन, सेंट्रलाइजेशन एक्सेट्रा, इन प्रिंसिपल्स को लेके बनाना पड़ेगा। तो क्लासिकल थ्योरी स्ट्रक्चर पर भी ध्यान देती थी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन पर, केवल प्रोसेस पर नहीं। प्रोसेस का मतलब होता है एक्टिविटीज, कार्य, फंक्शंस। और साइंटिफिक मैनेजमेंट थ्योरी इज मेनली फोकसिंग ऑन प्रोसेस, not on structure. And that's why the classical theory is also called as a formal structural theory. तो मैं आपको ये भी बोल सकता हूं that scientific management theory is mainly procedural theory, while classical theory is of course both structural and procedural concept of theory. There's a basic difference between the two theories. I hope you got my point. I agree. However, both the theories consider a person as an economic man. Now, when I use the term economic man in the sense, a person who is getting motivated only by materialistic, physical, economical factors. पैसा, धन, दौलत, सुरक्षा, कार, बंगला, कार इत्यादि, इससे वो मोटिवेट होता है। ज़्यादा पैसा दोगे तो ज़्यादा मोटिवेट होगा, ठीक से काम करेगा। नहीं दोगे तो ऑफकोर्स वो डिमोटिवेट हो जाएगा, ऑर्गेनाइजेशन छोड़ के भाग जाएगा। So I hope so. That's a basic point of difference between the two theories. And the question with regard to these two theories would be asked, of course, in comparison. I mean in 5 marker. ठीक है? तो मुझे उम्मीद है दोनों थ्योरी समझे। एक कंपैरिजन हम लोगों ने ड्रॉ किया। ठीक है? तो एक चाहो तो एक टाइटल लिखो, मैं कुछ पॉइंट्स इसमें लिखवा दे रहा हूं ताकि आपको चीजें बिल्कुल क्लियर हो जाएं। वन टाइटल इस क्वेश्चन सीधे पूछ सकते हैं और टाइटल होगा कंपैरिजन बिटवीन साइंटिफिक मैनेजमेंट एंड क्लासिकल थ्योरी। Just write the title and write some points about it. Comparison between scientific management and classical theories. Comparison between scientific management and classical theory. Agree? So just write some points on that. Done? Just write some points on that. First point. First point. Continue. और ठीक से समझ के लिखना ताकि आपकी एग्जामिनेशन की तैयारी भी यहां पर हो जाए। इसको लिखोगे। फर्स्ट पॉइंट, साइंटिफिक मैनेजमेंट थ्योरी mainly tries to develop those scientific methods or techniques which could bring की जगह लिखो which could develop the best way to do any particular type of work. Which could develop the best way to do any particular type of work. Best way to develop any particular type of work. Any particular type of work. Although classical theory tries to develop those fundamental principles. Classical theory tries to develop those fundamental principles principles which could bring efficiency and economy in an organization. Which could bring efficiency and economy in an organization. Efficiency and economy in an organization. In an organization. So the very first point of difference very much clear. In an organization. Second, the main focus of scientific management theory. The main focus of, second point of difference, the main focus of scientific management theory. The main focus of scientific management theory. The main focus of scientific management theory is on management of workers. Is on management of workers, that is relying more on management of workers, that is relying more on shop floor management, निचले level पे, relying more on shop floor management. Shop floor management. Shop floor management. However, the classical theory, wants to develop a formal organizational structure. Wants to develop a formal organizational structure with the purpose to bring more efficiency, with the purpose to bring more efficiency, in the employees working at higher level. More efficiency in the employees working at higher level. Employees working at higher level. Working at higher level. I agree. Working at higher level. So I hope so this point of difference also very much clear. Third point of difference लिखेंगे. देखो ये 5 मार्कर के हिसाब से हम लोग तैयारी कर रहे हैं, तो थर्ड पॉइंट ऑफ डिफरेंस लिखो. Third point of difference. Continue. Scientific management theory mainly focuses on the efficiency of method or processes. Efficiency of method or processes. तरीकों पर ध्यान देते थे. Method or processes, while classical theory not only focus on the procedural part, but also the structural aspect of the organization. पूरा स्ट्रक्चर ऊपर से लेकर नीचे तक कैसे बनाना चाहिए ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को, but also the structural aspect of the organization. I hope this point of difference also clear. Okay. One more point of difference we can demarcate. Continue. Scientific management theory adopts the principle of functional foremanship. Scientific management theory adopts the principle of functional foremanship. That is, an employee or worker should be supervised and directed by. कल मैंने बताया था आप लोगों को याद होगा. Should be supervised and directed by 8 supervisors or 8 specialists. Directed and supervised by 8 specialists. 8 specialists. 8 specialists. However, the propounders of classical theory, propounders of classical theory, adhere to the principle of unity of command. Remember, I told you, adhere to the principle of unity of command. The principle of unity of command, that is a worker should be commanded and supervised only by one person. Only by one person. I hope all the differences are clear in the paragraph. Although both theories consider a person as an economic man. Consider a person as an economic man that get motivated only by economical factors. ठीक है? So I hope you understand the very fundamental basis of classical theory and the comparison of classical theory with that of the scientific management theory. And now I am coming to the last important aspect of this theory from where the question could be asked, and that is critical evaluation. तो यहाँ पर मैं करने क्या वाला हूँ, मैं कुछ grounds of criticism को highlight करूंगा, फिर हम उसको evaluate करेंगे कि criticism सही है या गलत है. 3-4 पॉइंट को मैं यहाँ पर evaluate करके दूंगा, फिर मैं आपको एक होमवर्क दूंगा. होमवर्क में आपको अपने आंसर्स लिखने हैं, कुछ ज्यादा पॉइंट्स 3-4 और पॉइंट्स लिख लेने हैं क्रिटिकल एवेल्यूएशन के, और फिर ही आपका टॉपिक पूरा तैयार हो जाएगा. मैंने सारे नोट्स आपको प्रोवाइड करे हैं, तो उसमें से पढ़िए और क्रिटिकल इवैल्यूएशन का आंसर कैसे लिखा जाता है उसको समझिए. मैं कुछ एग्जांपल्स यहां पर आपको देता हूं ताकि आपके दिमाग में चीजें काफी क्लियर हो जाएं. ठीक है? तो यू कैन राइट ब्रॉड टाइटल नाउ, क्रिटिकल इवैल्यूएशन ऑफ द थ्योरी. क्रिटिकल इवैल्यूएशन ऑफ द थ्योरी. Critical evaluation of the theory. Critical evaluation of the theory. Now just see. So when we are doing the critical evaluation, just see the very first criticism what we can highlight over here. तो पहला criticism इस theory का ये है कि the principles which were developed by the propounders of the theory, I told you, Fayol has given 14 principles. Luther Gulick has given 10 principles, and of course Moon and Riley has given 4 principles. Principles like unity of command, hierarchy, division of work, centralization, delegation, number of order, discipline, कई principles हैं. सब आपके notes में एक बार देखिएगा उनको. ठीक है? So number of principles are given. So the main target of the critics against that particular theory was that all these principles are not having universal validity. मतलब if we are presuming that by adopting or by complying, by exercising and by implementing these principles in any type of organization we can bring efficiency, then it is a utopian thought. It is an obsolete expression. It is an illogical perception. It is an absurding, you can say basically, assumption. ऐसा नहीं होता है. अगर हम ये सोच के चलते हैं कि इन प्रिंसिपल्स को हम हर जगह अप्लाई कर देंगे, इंडिया के ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में, इंडिया के एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में, जापान के, रशिया के, नॉर्थ अमेरिका के, साउथ अमेरिका के देशों के, तो ये प्रिंसिपल एफिशिएंसी लेके आ जाएंगे, ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को ज्यादा कार्यकुशल बना देंगे, प्रोडक्टिव बना देंगे, तो ये बिल्कुल गलत बात है. एवरी कंट्री, एवरी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, एवरी सेटअप हैव इट्स ओन कल्चर. I mean, culture of which culture? Of course, professional culture, administrative culture to do a particular type of work. So we cannot apply these principles, of course, in a universal manner, in a positive manner, of course, in different organization setup? No, we cannot. We cannot do that. Okay? And there are two scholars, one was March and other one was Simon, mainly Simon. Simon has used some mnemonics against, actually some phrases against, terms against these principles. And Mr. Herbert Simon has demarcated these principles as proverb, nuisances. Okay? Because these principles, one principle is having its own contradictory principle. On one hand, we are focusing on centralization. On the other hand, we are again focusing on delegation. On one hand, we are focusing on unity of command. On the other hand, we are focusing on specialization. तो अगर यूनिटी ऑफ कमांड है तो स्पेशलाइजेशन कैसे आ सकता है? और अगर आपको स्पेशलाइजेशन लाना है तो आपको एक वर्कर को कई लोगों से, टेक्नीशियन, प्रोफेशनल, आर्किटेक्ट, सबसे, एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर, मैनेजर, सबसे कमांड लेनी पड़ेगी. सो एवरी प्रिंसिपल हैव इट्स ओन कॉन्ट्राडिक्टरी प्रिंसिपल, एंड टू कॉन्ट्राडिक्टरी प्रिंसिपल कैन नॉट सस्टेन इन द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. तो इनका यह कहना था कि दीज प्रिंसिपल्स आर इनकंसिस्टेंट. That does not have the same type of universal application. I agree. Because every principle have its own contradictory principle. And based on the ground of contradictoriness, we can, of course, what? Criticize a principle. So it was one of the ground of criticism. Okay? One of the ground of criticism. Lekin, how we can counter it? ठीक है. It's a very accepted thought that these principles which are developed by classical theorists cannot be applied in every country, every organization, every setting. No, it is not possible. It's also not possible that these principles could bring efficiency in economy in every type of organization. ऐसा नहीं होता है. Every organization of different countries have its own culture, work profile, type of workers, mode of thinking, everything is there. It is very well accepted. But how we can counter? We can counter that principles like authority, responsibility, hierarchy, okay, division of work, etc. So there are a number of principles which are relevant till now. I mean, when we are creating a particular organization, we always create the organization based on the same concept, same principles, like hierarchy, division of work. There are some activities in which centralization is required. Centralization का मतलब होता है कि power superior के पास होनी चाहिए. There are some activities in which decentralization or delegation is required. Other principles like order. Order means, of course, when a superior is given the order to subordinate, it is required for the subordinate to follow the order. अगर superior subordinate को order देता है तो subordinate को order मानना चाहिए. अगर वो order नहीं मानेगा तो chaos हो जाएगा. वो organization काम कैसे करेगा? Discipline. तो ऐसे कुछ principles हैं, be very sure, which have universal applicability. They are relevant till now. So we cannot outrightly reject all these principles. Yeah, we can say the principles are not having universal validity. But of course, there are some principles which are relevant till now. And this theory became the very first one to emphasize on the applicability of these principles which are relevant for every type of organization till date. ये अभी तक रेलेवेंट बने हुए हैं और इस तरीके से हम लोग क्रिटिसिज्म का क्या कर रहे हैं? इवैल्यूएशन कर. In this way we are evaluating the criticism. ठीक है. अच्छा, there is one more ground by which we can criticize the theory. कई लोगों का ये कहना था, the forthcoming scholars like March, Simons, etc. and they use a term that this particular theory is somewhat unscientific. Unscientific. Now, why the theory was regarded as unscientific? Because the principles which are propounded by the theorist were not universally or scientifically tested. मतलब क्लासिकल थ्योरी ने ये बोल दिया कि भाई हर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में हायरार्की होनी चाहिए, डिवीजन ऑफ वर्क होना चाहिए, यूनिटी ऑफ कमांड होनी चाहिए, सेंट्रलाइजेशन होना चाहिए, डेलीगेशन होना चाहिए. मान लिया, ठीक है. लेकिन इसको आपने हर जगह टेस्ट कहाँ किया? आपने थ्योरी डेवलप करी अमेरिका में, लेकिन यूरोप में आपने टेस्ट नहीं किया, रशिया में नहीं किया, इंडिया में नहीं किया, चाइना में नहीं किया. कि चाइना का जो एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन है, क्या वहां पर ये सारे प्रिंसिपल साइंटिफिकली टेस्टेड हैं? So these principles are not having scientific validity according to the critics of the theory. But again, then we can counter it. We can counter it that, of course, there are so many principles which are proposed by the theorists of classical thought are having the same type of scientific validity. Yes, it is scientifically proven that in any type of organization, it could be democratic, autocratic, it could be republic, it could be, you can say basically, presidential. So in any type of organization, these principles are equally applicable. तो अगर आप साइंटिफिक ग्राउंड को क्रिटिसाइज कर रहे हो तो आप इसको इस तरीके से क्रिटिसाइज नहीं कर सकते कि क्योंकि इनकी टेस्टिंग पहले नहीं हुई थी, वेरिफिकेशन पहले नहीं हुआ था, इसलिए उतने एफिशिएंट नहीं है। भले ही इनका वेरिफिकेशन और टेस्टिंग नहीं हुई हो, लेकिन अभी भी बहुत सारे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में, बहुत सारी कंट्रीज में ये सारे के सारे प्रिंसिपल्स रेलेवेंट बने हुए हैं। दे आर स्टिल रेलेवेंट and the principles are having scientific basis, although they are not tested, but still they are having scientific basis. क्योंकि हम इंडिया के एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को भी देख लो, हमारे क्या होता है, मिनिस्ट्री होती है, मिनिस्ट्री के नीचे डिपार्टमेंट होते हैं, डिपार्टमेंट के नीचे विंग्स होती हैं, विंग्स के नीचे ब्रांचेस होते हैं, ब्रांचेस के नीचे सब ऑफिसर्स होते हैं। अगर हम डिस्ट्रिक्ट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन की बात करें तो मैं आपको कई बार बता रहा हूं, कलेक्टर के नीचे एसडीएम, एसडीएम के नीचे तहसीलदार हैं, सो एंड सो फोर्थ। तो देखो हायरार्की तो है ना, डिवीजन ऑफ वर्क तो है ना, सबकी अथॉरिटी और रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी क्लियर तो है। So although these principles are not scientifically verified, but again the thing is that the principles are having, some principles are having a cognizable universal applicability, and it has been scientifically proven. In this way we can counter the argument, I mean criticism. ठीक है, तो जब आप क्रिटिसिज्म को इवेल्युएट करते हो, मेरे ख्याल से आप समझ गए होंगे, तो उस आंसर को बोला जाता है क्रिटिकल इवेल्युएशन। पहले आपको क्रिटिसाइज करना है, क्रिटिसिज्म को इवेल्युएट करना है कि क्रिटिसिज्म कितना सही है या गलत है। मुझे उम्मीद है आप लोग समझ रहे होंगे। ठीक है, तो इन दोनों ग्राउंड्स को लिखो क्रिटिसिज्म के, और फिर मैं होमवर्क देता हूं आपको, 4-5 पॉइंट आपको लिखना है क्रिटिकल इवेल्युएशन के। चलिए लिखेगा। फर्स्ट, critical evaluation, you can write in paragraph, you can write in point wise also. First point, the principles of organization propounded by, the principles of organization propounded by the scholars of classical theories, propounded by the scholars of classical theory were regarded as proverb myth, मतलब मुहावरे जैसे हैं ये, were regarded as proverb myth slogans and pompous inanities, POMPOUS, slogans and pompous, pompous inanities, INANITIES, मतलब absurding, illogical, pompous inanities, because every principle, have its own opposite contradictory principle. Because every principle have its own opposite contradictory principle. And these principles are also not these principles are also not universally applied. And these principles are also not universally applicable. ठीक है, तो ये तो क्रिटिसिज्म हो गया। एंड नाउ व्हाट वी हैव टू डू, वी हैव टू डू द इवैल्यूएशन ऑफ क्रिटिसिज्म। चेंज द पैराग्राफ, वहीं के वहीं करो, चेंज द पैराग्राफ। Although the principles, ऐसा करो, although some principles are not having, although some principles are not having universal application, but universal application, but other principles like division of work, authority, responsibility, delegation, etc., are relevant in every type of organization, organization and administrative setting, समझ रहे हो कैसे करना है critical evaluate? I hope it's clear. So here we have discussed two aspects. One is negative, other one positive, and here we have evaluated the criticism, actually the ground of criticism. Next ground of criticism, second. Okay. Next point. According to some scholars like March, 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 Simon, etc. MARCH, March, Simon, 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 etc. These principles are unscientific. That is, they are not scientifically tested. Under different scientific conditions. So there's a criticism under different scientific conditions. Now we have to evaluate it. Paragraph change. Condition. Paragraph change. The classical thinkers develop administration. As a science. They are the first to propound that. ऐसा करो. They are the first to propound the idea that administration itself is a separate activity. Administration itself is a separate activity and administration based on these fundamental principles. These fundamental principles have attained high degree of effectiveness. In different organization of different countries. तो मुझे उम्मीद है आप लोग समझ गए that how you have to write the answer. Again I am giving homework to you. मैंने आपको एक सैंपल बता दिया that how we have to do the critical evaluation. So I have discussed 2 points over here. You can discuss 4 or 5 points. लेकिन अब आपको थोड़ी सी मेहनत करनी पड़ेगी. मेहनत करने के लिए आपको करना ये पड़ेगा कि you have to read the printed notes what I have provided, of course in the descriptive section. Read that, highlight the grounds of criticism, then evaluate it. Agree? And then we can do, of course, what the critical evaluation of the topic. Write 3, 4, 5 points. 2 I have dictated, and the remaining 2 or 3 you have to write on your own. ये आपकी प्रैक्टिस होगी. मेरे ख्याल से समझ गए मैं क्या कहना चाहता हूं. ठीक है. So this is classical theory for you. Here we have discussed two theories. I hope both the concepts are very much clear. The scientific management theory and the classical theory. मैं कोशिश ये कर रहा हूं कि most of the topics would be covered in the class. But again, you have to cover some aspects, some dimensions of the concerned topic on your own. Although I am providing all the sample size information to you, of course, in the concerned classes. लेकिन कुछ काम आपको करना पड़ेगा, तब जाके आपकी आंसर राइटिंग स्किल्स डेवलप होंगी. ठीक है. So here we have completed 2 important theories, and now we have to take the regard of 2 or 3 more important theories, and then we are in a position to wind up this topic. Our next important theory of discussion would be bureaucratic theory. And as I told you before, again the evolution of bureaucratic theory has taken place in the second stage of evolution of public administration as a discipline. मतलब जो दूसरी स्टेज थी वहां पर ब्यूरोक्रेटिक थ्योरी का इवोल्यूशन हुआ था फ्रॉम 1927 टू 1937. तो अब हमें देखना है ब्यूरोक्रेटिक थ्योरी क्या है. उसके बाद हम लोग दूसरी स्टेज पर आएंगे, और वो स्टेज कौन सी है? एरा ऑफ चैलेंज. और एरा ऑफ चैलेंज में 2 थ्योरीज आई थी. पहली थी ह्यूमन रिलेशन थ्योरी, दूसरी थी बिहेवियरल थ्योरी. ठीक है. तो I hope the concepts are very much clear in your mind. So this is all for today. I mean today's lecture. If you have you can say basically any suggestion or feedback with regard to the level of teaching what I am imparting and our system is imparting, then you can of course provide feedback to us. If you are getting duly benefited from the lecture, then of course you can also provide some feedback of appreciation to us. ठीक है. और ये भी आप कर सकते हो. अभी आने वाले समय में मैं कुछ और लेक्चर्स आपके हमारे दूसरे टीचर्स के बनवाने वाला हूँ, वो आपको प्रोवाइड होंगे ताकि आपको काफ़ी बेनिफिट मिले इस एग्जामिनेशन, खासतौर पर MPPSC के एग्जामिनेशन में, MPPSC मेंस के एग्जामिनेशन में एक्चुअली. ठीक है. थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर टुडे. टेक केयर, डू वेल, बी सेफ, बी हेल्दी, एंड ऑफ कोर्स वर्क हार्ड. थैंक यू. टेक केयर.